All righty, you can be seated real quick. Good to see everybody. All right, let's just be honest. How many of you, I just really want to say how much I appreciate your deep commitment to skip school to come here today. That is an unbelievable level of sacrifice to ask you to miss school today. How many of you got like divinely lucky and you actually got out of a test today and it got pushed to Monday? Oh yeah, God is good right there for those folks right there. Nothing like skipping school. Anyway, great to see everybody here. We're going to have a wonderful time today and then also tonight at 7, and then I'm going to speak tomorrow at the very end of the convention. Tremendously appreciative of Chris, Stanley, and the team allowing me to come and speak. And I get that every single day. What you just heard, that's North Central University. That's the vibe and the spirit of that university. I'll talk more about that tonight. But I just so appreciate Worship Live and being here with us. I probably heard one of the craziest things I've ever heard in my life right before I walked on stage. Some guy said, hey, they've been using this building for years. How many have been coming to youth convention here for a while? Well, I don't know if any of you go all the way back. Some of the people that are youth pastors or sponsors go back to the 1990s, back in the 1900s, I should say. But they said there was a guy, I know Ron Heitman, he's a friend of mine, he was a former DYD, and he did an illustration up here with live animals, and he actually had live, legit lions in cages up here. Anybody ever heard this story about the lions? So the story I just heard, and I know it's true, the guy wouldn't have told me, is that the service, they did the whole illustration, the lions are all safe and all the animals and whatever it was up here is back in their cages. The guy's up here speaking. And apparently they hire a college guy to kind of stand at the end of the bleachers on both sides to kind of monitor in case anybody wants to go back there and do like a marriage proposal, I guess is what they're monitoring, right? So that nobody goes back under the bleachers there. So the guy is standing there like a mall cop, just standing there apparently, college guy doing his job. And he looks down, and one of the lions had gotten out of the cage and was wandering back and forth under that bleacher right there. A full-grown lion is just meandering under the bleachers. And the college guy is standing there, and he looks like this, and the lion is right here looking at him. And they turn around, he just spots this lion right here. They kind of stare at each other. And to his credit, I heard that the college guy, he stood his ground. He didn't move because he wanted to protect you. So he stood his ground against the lion. But he also wet his pants. That's true. That's not folklore. He stood there with the lion and he wet his pants. So it tells me you can be brave and totally afraid at the same time. The lion did not attack him. It also tells me if you want a lion not to bite you, wet your pants as fast as possible. It keeps lions away. But is that story true? Okay, man. Okay, if you tell it to me, I guess it's so. So here we go. I want to introduce you to my crew a little bit before we turn our hearts to the scriptures here this afternoon. And I usually travel with my wife. Unfortunately, she is with me. We were in Wisconsin last week and doing the Wisconsin Youth Convention. And I love my wife. She's beautiful. Here's my favorite picture of my wife. I want you to see my wife. Here she is right here. If you can put that picture up. That is my favorite picture of my girl right there. I know it's kind of fuzzy a little bit, but you can see the smile and the little hair barrette and the little bending of the hands. It's so feminine, the little matching purse. And the gleam in her eye, that's what she looks like. She looks different now. Are you still down here, Karen? Can you come up real fast? I want to show everybody the grown-up version. Keep that picture up. This is the grown-up version. No, go back. This is the grown-up version right here of Mrs. H, right there. Love her dearly. Very cute. You haven't changed a bit. Very nice right there. Very cool. Been married for 37 years, 4 kids, and actually 9 grandchildren instead of 6. But my wife, you can tell that she's seen something. She's seen the future. There's a gleam in her eye. And I think this is what God has shown her about her future. Next slide, if you will. I think that's what the Lord was showing her. You love the little twisty pants right there? My dad worked in the lumber industry, and he used to chop big trees down with a chainsaw, and I think that's what he used on my hair right there, that haircut. But actually, that haircut, you put some skinny jeans on that guy, I could be a worship leader in any church in America with that haircut right there. Go back to her real quick. Go back to her. Go back to me. I just want to give hope to every dude in this room. If you can start like that, because some of you still look like that, okay? And I just want you to know that if you can start like that and end up with her, there's hope for every dude in this room. Can somebody say amen to every guy in this room? You can do it. Hang in there. So we fell in love, stayed in love, got married, and that little preschool couple right there, we turned out this way. I hope it's kind of clear up there. It's a little big and fuzzy. Next slide, if you will. So we kind of turned into that little crew right there. So that's my wife next to me, and that's my dog, Jack. I don't know if you can see him well because he no longer looks at the photographer because he's pretty ticked. Up until 3 years ago, he was the only kid in that picture. Now all those grandkids have dominated his world, so he's not too happy. But that's my oldest daughter in the front. Her husband is named Marcelo, and we love Marcelo. He's from Brazil, but I have one daughter and 3 sons. So you're looking at my biological kids up there of 1 daughter and 3 boys. All 4 are married. When your boys get married, it's like an addition to your family, man. But when your daughter gets married, it's like an abduction. And this guy came into our church, never should have let him in the door. And he swept, his name was Marcelo, and he was tall and handsome and from Brazil. And he loved the Lord. He was impossible to hate, fell in love with her. He's not in the picture. We don't keep him out on purpose, but he just wasn't there for the photograph. That's little Olivia. And she's a North Central grad. Then I have my next oldest son right here to your left. That's Tyler, his wife, Nicole. And their 2 little kids, that's Elias and Gemma. And little Elias, he's cute. He calls Karen Gaga, which is pretty cool, Gaga, till he turned to me and called me Caca. And I know enough Spanish. We sang in Spanish. You know you're not calling me Caca. I know enough Spanish. So we got him up to Bompa now. We're doing some work with him. But we've got them 2. And then I got my next son in the front, this guy in the blue shirt. That's Kramer. And Kramer's a character. He just got married to that girl. She had 2 kids. She got pregnant when she was 16. And then she got pregnant again when she was 19. And when she just found out she was pregnant at 19, she just was coming to the Lord, and she got scared and went down to Planned Parenthood and took an RU46 pill to abort the baby, got into the car and was shaking and realized that she had done something terrible and tried to throw up and get it out of her system, and she couldn't do it. So she Googled real quick on her phone and found out there was an experimental drug that you can take to potentially reverse the abortion. Planned Parenthood mocked her. They said, you're going to give birth to a monster now, a deformed child. The child began to grow. She took this antidote to the abortion pill. The baby continued to grow, and 9 months later, that healthy, perfect little boy named Zachariah was born, and he just turned 5, the little guy. But Kramer's big. It was funny. They're pregnant now with their 3rd child, and Becky was asking, hey, how big was Kramer when he was born? Because she's getting a little nervous. She goes, he has a big head. And my son does have a big head. Does he have a big head right there? He grew into his head. But when he was born, his head was that size. I'm not joking. He spent his whole life trying to catch up with his head, man. It was crazy, Bill. He was always out in front. But they have 2 little boys. Great, great man of God, woman of God. Jesus uses them all over the United States. She's one of the most prolific pro-life speakers in America now. Travels all over the U.S. just speaking about the kingdom and speaking about life. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful story. Then my youngest on top there, that's Spencer. He's my biggest dude. He is 6'5". He was about 250. When he was born, he was dying, and he had a virus, and they said he wasn't going to make it. And he lived past this, and they said he was going to be little and small and anemic. And he ends up being a 6'5" Division I college football player. I don't know if there's any football fans here, but he played tight end for Cal in the Pac-12, caught a pass against the dreaded Ohio State Buckeyes. The dude was up here singing in a Buckeye hoodie earlier. He caught a pass against Ohio State. Guy hit him in the knee, broke his leg straight back at the knee, 90 degrees, laid his calf flat on the ground backwards. It was brutal, and it tore everything to shreds. He was headed to the NFL, I believe, but it ended his football career. But he married Brianna right there, their little boy, Spencer Jr., and then they're pregnant with their next one on the way. So that's my crew right there. We love them dearly, and we got 3 more on the way now. So we got nine happening. So next slide, if you will, real quick. I'll talk about this tonight just real fast. That's where I spend most of my life, is in that room right there at this wonderful university, best university in America, the #1 downtown Christian university in the U.S. It's just a magnificent thing that God is doing. If you're serious about leadership, I don't care whether you want to be a teacher, whether you want to be a church planter, if you want to go into the sciences, biology, whatever you want to go into, criminal justice, sports management, but you're serious about your faith and serious about becoming a top-tier leader, we'd love to have you stop by. I got something cool tonight. I think we're going to give away, $24 million tonight. So you got to come back at 7 o'clock. So yeah, I said 24 million. You have to come in the room, and I'll explain what that's all about. But come back at 7. But anyway, that's what it's like every day at 11 o'clock at our university. Next slide, if you will. Here we go. And let's go to Genesis. It's actually Genesis 35. I apologize for that little typo. Genesis chapter 35, beginning at verse 17. Here we go. It says, after a very hard delivery, the midwife was assisting this woman named Rachel, who was having a baby out in the middle of nowhere. And Rachel had already had a child named Joseph. Her husband was Jacob, one of the most famous men in the Bible. And she's giving birth on their way between 2 destination spots. So literally, in the middle of nowhere, she can't take it no more, and here comes the baby. And so the midwife, who's traveling with the caravan, tells her, don't be afraid, you have another son. Rachel was about to die. That's Crazyville. This is one of those stories where a mom is about to die giving birth to her baby. It was far more common than it is today, medical breakthroughs and medical, what I call ministry to families, mitigates much of what happened to Rachel. But back then, if that baby was breached, if something had gone awry, that mother could die while the baby was being born. And Rachel was about to die. But with her last breath, Mama says something that's about to change the trajectory of this child's life. I want to talk to you about that for a few minutes and kind of preach this in 2 parts this afternoon and then tonight after dinner. So the mother's about to die, and it says with her last breath, she names the baby Ben-Oni, which means son of my sorrow. So this mother, the last thing this loving mother does is put her pain and her story into her kid. Can you imagine for the rest of your life introducing yourself? Hey, my name is, my mom died when I was born. Or hey, my name is, my parents divorced because of me. Hey, my name is, my dad molested me. Hey, my name is. Can you believe that this mother had this, I don't know what you want to call it, this mental, spiritual lapse in her own sorrows, but that's what human beings do. Even the best of human beings, the best of parents, they pass on their pain to their kids. And the mother was about to clothe this kid in her story, not his. There are millions of young people walking around this nation who are clothed in somebody else's story. They've inherited the pain of the parent or the grandparent, and they have to live it out and go in that identity for the rest of their life. Now, one of the hardest things we have to do as Christians is honor our parents but break free from their story. That's me. I love my father with all my heart, but my dad went through terrible darkness for the majority of his life. My dad died of a drug overdose when he was 64. I'll tell you about that maybe tonight. But I lived with my dad's story up until my 20s, and then something dramatically happened that began to launch my own story. But this mother was giving her pain to her child. For the rest of his life, his identity would be his mother's death. People would blame the kid for the mother's death. That kid would have to live with that idea forever on this planet. What hope would you have if all you have in this life is the story of another person that you got to carry. There's another story in the Bible. Next slide, if you will. Oh, no, keep that up there. Keep that up there. The baby's father, however, so the baby's born, is coming out. It's a son. And Rachel goes, his name will be sorrow, pain. And as the midwife holds the baby, she thinks his new name is Ben-Oni, son of my sorrows. But Jacob, the husband, he steps into the scene. He just lost his wife, but he now has a son. Think of his crazy state of mind. And the Bible says that Jacob, he says, no. However, his name shall be Benjamin, son of longevity. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. So the baby's being born. Mom names the kid pain, sorrow, and death. And dad names the kid longevity, son of my days, Benjamin. That really is the entire story of the gospel right there. That is the entire description of Christianity. We are born broken. The shame and the guilt that we are clothed in, that we inherited simply by being part of the human race. Some of us have a very intense story that we've inherited. Some of us don't know where we came from. Some of us, we live with our life going, I don't know what I'm supposed to live up to. I don't even know my story. Other people come from great homes and they go, how do I live up to that? Everybody's story is a little bit different. Mine was like Ben-Oni. Am I a son of sorrow? Am I a teenager of sorrow, or am I a teenager of strength? Am I in my adult life here, if I'm a youth pastor, youth worker, sponsor, van driver, however you got into this room, work for the union, however you're in this room, are you a person of sorrow? You simply say, this is my story. I've had no control over my story. It was given to me by somebody else. Or maybe you're in this room and you've been touched by Christ and he has saved you and he's began to work in your life and teach your mind and your heart. That like Jacob, Jesus stepped into your life and said, no, you were not born for sorrow. You were not born with that identity. This conquered identity, this identity that's been given to you. It's not your name. Your name is son of strength, or son of longevity, or son of years. Your name is Benjamin. These stories are all through the Bible. How about this one? One of my favorite people in the Bible. Next slide, if you will. This guy in 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 8, it says that Mephibosheth, it's a great name, bowed respectfully, this is before King David, and said, who is your servant? Now, King David has invited Mephibosheth to his table. Mephibosheth is a millennial. He's probably 20, 22. He's not a Generation Z. He's a millennial, early 20s. He's at the king's table. And here's what he says to the king. Who is your servant that you should show such kindness to a dead dog like me? What would cause a millennial, a 20-something, to call himself a dead dog? He's in the presence of the king of Israel, but he can't receive love. And that's how you know somebody's healthy. They can give love and receive love. Something was broken inside this millennial. And he calls himself a dead dog. What would make a 20-something call themselves a dead dog? Well, this is what happened about 15 years earlier. Next slide. 2 Samuel 4:4. It says, now Jonathan, the son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both his feet. That's talking about Mephibosheth. Okay, so Saul was the first king of Israel. He screwed up. He trusted in himself. He would never be humble. He ended up consulting witches when God had a great plan for King Saul. His son Jonathan was a godly man. Jonathan had a child named Mephibosheth who was born healthy. The guy who said he was a dead dog was actually born of sound mind and health. But King Saul, because he disobeyed God, a war broke out against Grandpa. This is Mephibosheth's grandpa. And this war, the enemy came against Saul. The war was so ravaging that King Saul and his son Jonathan died in the war. So it was grandpa's war. It was grandpa's rebellion. The son, Jonathan, dies, and then a nurse sees 5-year-old Mephibosheth, runs over and picks up a 5-year-old kid. It says he was 5 years old when news about Saul, his grandfather, and Jonathan, his father, came from Jezreel, saying that they were dead. His nurse picked him up and fled. But as she hurried to leave, he fell from her arms and became crippled. So they were fleeing war. She picks up this 5-year-old kid, somehow trips, drops the 5-year-old. He falls in such a way, whether it was from a balcony or from a stair or a rock, but he falls in such a way that he snaps both of his legs. And there's no medical help. So they're just fleeing for their life. So somehow those bones were never set. He got dropped as a kid. I promise you, in this room, a crowd this size, there's probably so many teenagers in here that were dropped as a kid. Now, I'm not saying that to prick self-pity and victimization, because we're going to go somewhere powerful with this. But there's no doubt that we have a generation that's been dropped in their parents' war. They were dropped in their grandfather's war, dropped in their parents' war. It wasn't even your war. You didn't ask for it. You're trying to get help, you're just a kid. You get exposed to stuff. And suddenly you find yourself living your life carrying another person's story. And this stuff stays on you your whole life. Even in your 20s, the grandson of the former king looked in the mirror and all he saw was a dead dog. He couldn't even receive love. That's the power when you are broken as a kid and you carry a story that's not your own. But today, that's about to end. It's about to end here at the 3 o'clock service. And I'm going to show you a way forward on how to break free so that you can take back your story, take back your testimony, and that you don't have to live your life carrying around the pain and the struggle of your parents' war. I love my parents. I honor my dad. I miss my dad. I cried like a baby when my dad died. My dad one time grabbed me by the throat when I was 12, and he missed picking me up for Little League sign-ups. Sports was my refuge because it was just a crazy life. We moved 27 times by the time I was 16. We lived with people. We lived in rental properties, apartments. We crash padded at people's houses. We lived in our car one time. And I just got lost in sports. Sports was my refuge. My coaches saved my life. Then a youth pastor, a volunteer youth pastor in Redding, California, saved my life. And if it wasn't for those people, I never could have broke free from the pain of my parents just naming me and declaring my entire future for me. But the Lord stepped in like Jacob. And he said, no, Scott, that's not your name. You're not going to perpetuate this madness. I'm going to do something in you, because I know I just showed you one of my highlight films of my family up there, and you think, well, you just kind of came, just kind of fell into your president of a university, just kind of all simple. Yeah, not in any way, shape, or form. That photo of my second family doesn't look anything like my first. I love my siblings. My mom has Alzheimer's now. My dad passed away in 2004. I was talking to him when he died on the phone. At first I was so mad at God, but then I kind of turned it and realized it was a gift to be able to be talking with my pop when he passed away. But had not Jesus stepped into this very confused late teenager's life, I would have carried out the story that was put on me by my family identity. But like Jacob, Jesus stepped in, and God used some other men and women to step in and said, Scott, you're born for more than this. This isn't God's plan for your life just to simply walk around in somebody else's story. I want to break you free from that. I want to give you something to do in this life. I'll tell you more about that a little bit tonight. So today, if the worship team is anywhere nearby, I know we're kind of going a little bit early here, but I want to leave time to pray with you in this first session. I want to tell you one more story that has changed my thinking. There was a day I was pastoring a church before I became the president of the university. And one of our staff pastors is from Zambia, Africa. And he has an orphanage and a clinic. He has a feeding program. It's phenomenal, but it started years ago when he was in Zambia and somebody had a sick baby, and it was a 6-hour Jeep ride to get the baby help. So they put the infant in their arms, and they held it for 3 hours on this bumpy Jeep ride. And 3 hours into the 6 hours, the infant died in their arms. So they carried a living baby for 3 hours, and then a dead baby for 3 more hours. Come to find out, all the baby needed was Tylenol. That's all he needed was some Tylenol. God spoke to them and said, this is ridiculous. So they wanted to start a little medical clinic out in the villages outside their town there in Zambia. About 15 years ago now, it has blossomed into Operation Hope Village and the I Dream Project. We've taken probably 100 people over there. We have probably spent $100,000 over the last decade helping them get their medical clinic, a place to educate the kids. There's hundreds of kids now that come to this place. They just drop off their kids there at the Hope Village. So he was over there one day. We're sitting in our staff meeting in California, Sacramento, and the phone rings. And he said, Pastor Scott, I need help. I don't know what to do. He said, there's a little boy here whose father is into witchcraft or spiritism, and it forbids him to use medicine. And so the child has been ravaged with a disease. I want you to put the first photo just of his face on the screen. This little boy's name is Emmanuel. Just leave it up there. Emmanuel's about 3 hours from death, right there. What happened was his body had contracted leprosy, gangrene, a flesh-eating disease. And I'm not trying to be provocative on a Friday afternoon, but when I talk about getting pain from your parents, this is a living picture of what I'm talking about. I'm going to show another picture, not yet, in a moment. It's horrible. You may not want to look at it. You might want to look down, and I'll tell you when it's about to come on the screen, because it shows human suffering of a child from the waist down. That was one of the most terrible things I've ever seen in my life. You see, the father didn't know what to do, and finally someone urged him to take him to this rough clinic. But then the father would not let the doctor treat him because the father was all messed up in his thinking. And finally, it was so bad, they looked to this man, Samson Kapizie, this pastor who's on our staff in California, but was traveling regularly back to Zambia, running the Hope Village. And they said, you make the decision. So the doctor said the only way to save the boy's life was to amputate his legs. That death was over his body. When I say death, this is a picture of what sin is doing to people when left just to itself, just to rot, decay, destroy the human soul. So I'm going to show the picture now, and you may not want to look, but I want to show you why there was a look of death in this boy's eyes. Next picture, if you will. It's one of the most horrible things I've ever had come across my iPhone. I was sitting in California, and I just jerked when I saw the photograph. You can see the bones and the tendons and this flesh-eating disease, the dead skin. And the father, because of his belief system, could not get that boy help. And so Sam said, what do we do? And I said, they've got to amputate his legs. He says, I need $500 right now. And so our staff, there was 12 people, from custodians, some administrative assistants, some youth pastors, and a worship pastor, and a volunteer senior citizens. There's about 12 of us around the table. He needed the $500 at that moment. We all reached in our pockets and we just pulled out crumpled 10s and crumpled 20s and we put them on the table. And we had over $500 in 30 seconds. I said, Sam, we got the $500 right here. We're going to wire it to you. Tell the doctor we have the money to take the boy's legs. Now, friends, I've raised money my whole life. I've never raised money to amputate somebody's legs. He was shaking and crying. Sam was. We were just couldn't believe that this was real. And so the doctor took the legs. This is Ben-Oni. This is son of my sorrows. But Jacob stepped in. He said, you're not going to carry around, even for another 3 hours, a story that was given to you. I've got a different plan. Within 7 days, this is what Emmanuel's face looked like 7 days later. Next photo. Six months after that, here's Emmanuel. Next slide. Is the next slide up? Right there. In school. Next slide, if you will. Learning, writing, leading. My beautiful bride had a chance to be in Zambia. And that smiling little Emmanuel that was dying because of his father's inability to give him anything other than a different story. Couldn't give him the kingdom until somebody stepped in. And then this is just a short time ago. This is Emmanuel now. Can you play the video?
Come on, play. Play.
He's learning to speak English, and I've already given him a full scholarship to attend North Central University when he becomes 18. Little Emmanuel was saved from the story that was given to him. I know it's kind of intense to kick it off like this, but we've only got a few minutes together really before tomorrow's done. And I only have one job as the guest, and that's to tell you the truth. And the truth I know is this, is that there is millions of young people in this nation that are walking around carrying a story that is not their own. And God wants to give you a new story. He wants to take you from sorrow to strength. This doesn't mean that we dishonor our parents. I love my dad. I get all of my giftings from my dad. My dad had a great homecoming in the Lord. But I also understand that there was a story given to him by his grandfather that he never broke free from. But I thank God Almighty, he brought people, he brought a moment, he brought some services, he brought an altar in which I could separate myself from that part of my parents that was a story of my grandfather's war, my parents' war. And instead of being trapped and thinking this is all I have for the rest of my life is somebody else's story, God has built an entirely new story in my life. And I want to pray today for you. I'd like you to close your eyes. Don't stand up yet, but just to close your eyes. You say, Scott, that describes my life. I already, at this stage of my life, I feel like I'm trapped in a story that was not of my choosing. And I need Jesus to help me the way that Benjamin had Jacob help him. I need something so strong over my life that tells me and never stops telling me that my life was not created to carry around a story of failure and a story of brokenness and a story of pain. But that Jesus has come to give me a new story, to turn me from sorrow to strength. I feel like I was dropped. I don't want to be a victim my whole life. I don't want to walk around and have people give me pity. But I feel like a dead dog already. I'm not even 20. Or maybe you're here as a sponsor or youth pastor and you've had this feeling of inadequacy because you got dropped and you've been crippled in a war that was not your own. You say, Scott, I know that Jesus has said this for me today. I want God to do a new story in my life. And I no longer want to be haunted by a story not of my making. I love my parents, my grandparents. I honor them even though I may not even know who they are. But I am free to let Jesus put his story in my life. And I don't want to be a person of sorrow. I want to be a person of strength. Make a difference in this world. This word was for me. From the top, the back of the room to the very front. I was on the last row when Jesus found me. My whole ministry life, people on the last row have been touched, saved. It was for them and for the front row too. You say, this word was for me. All I'm asking you to do is just put a hand up in the air, just with heads bowed, like this was me, man. I want a new story. Just put it up high and hold it up in the air. Hold it up in the air. Hold it up in the air. Just hold it up. Top to bottom, all over, right to left. I got a brand new story in my life that God is emerging. Here's what we're going to do. Just keep that hand up. Don't put your hand down. I want everybody to stand up. And those with the hand up, just keep your hand up when you stand up. Just keep it up. Everybody stand. Everybody stand. This word was for me. This word was for me. This word was for me. God is going to do a new story, build a new story, start a new story in my life. So here's what we're going to do. We got a minute to open up these altars. Keep your hand up in the air. If you got your hand in the air, I want you to start from the very back row to the front row. I want you to start stepping out where you are, and we're just going to come stand across. Trust me, there's a lot of you with a hand up. Would you come right now, front to back, side to side? Just come toward the front of the building. Just come to the front of the building right now. Everybody that says this word was, so you could be a Christian for a long time, but you've been battling the fact that you are trapped in somebody else's story in your life. Come on, let's keep walking. Look at this. There's a whole lot of folk that feel the same way that you are feeling in this room. This is not to get a big misery pit right here, friends. This is about freedom. This is about a new day. This is about a new touch from heaven. Come on, keep joining us. Anybody from the back to the front. This was for me. I don't want to walk around and carry around another story in my life. I want Jesus to do what he designed me to do in my life and to be free of it. Just keep coming. Okay, we're going to start worshiping the Lord. Guys, would you lift it up? Some praise. Let's lift our hands to the Lord and let's let Jesus just come and fill the arena and seal this word in our life and just break us of that mindset that I'm no longer trapped. I'm going to have my wife come and pray in a minute over you, but let's worship him right now. Let's go for it.